welcome you back. In the last session, we heard Professor Sridhar Iyer speaking about education in research in education. So we request Professor Sridhar Iyer to be session chair for the next session by Dr. Sishantu Mishra.
Okay.
For those who joined late, Professor Sridhar Iyer is a professor in interdisciplinary programming, education and technology and Department of Computer Science and Engineering, IIT Bombay. I request him to start next session.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shitanshu Mishra. He was a student at IIT Bombay, did his PhD from education technology, and subsequently went to Vanderbilt for his postdoc, and now he's back in India. And he's going to be running this workshop on research methods for carrying out action research. And I actually invite Shitanshu to introduce his co-presenters in the workshop. So they're all students or alumni of education technology IIT Bombay. So it's a moment of pride for me to see all of them offering a workshop and going ahead. So this is a workshop that we have offered earlier in T4E conference, and this is the first time we're offering it in compute. Yeah, over to you, Shitanshu.
Thank you, Professor Sridharaya, for introduction. So just to clarify, myself along with my other colleagues, Pankaj, Chavan, Prajesh Prasad, and Lakshmi Ganesh, as Professor Iyer said, that they all are organizing this workshop together. So just to confirm if my screen is visible to all.
Yes, yes, your screen is visible.
Nice. Okay, so let's start this session, and maybe we are already 15 minutes lagging. So let me just introduce this session, and then I'll pass the baton to the next speaker. So this is not a talk, but a workshop, uh, and we are going to talk about some nuances uh, which are important to take care of when we as a teacher, I mean, what Professor Sheeter in his talk talked about, there were several levels where teacher can transition from a plain practitioner to a researcher. So we are going to talk about some nuances and some templatized frameworks that you all can use if you want to transform from one level to other. So these are one set of tools that you can use. So these were the levels that Professor Shidhar talked about in his last talk. So what we are going to uh, do is give you some tools, some frameworks, and along with some hands-on activities, such that you can help yourself to reach from level 0 to somewhat level 3. And maybe if you can work ahead and build your interest further, you can keep growing in all these levels and ultimately sustain yourself in level 4. So here's the workshop outline. So it was supposed to be a total 5 hours workshop with a 2 hours break. So we'll start with introduction to workshop that I'm doing, and the next Pankaj will come up and talk about critically reflective teaching. And then we'll have 2 hours break, and then we'll start session 2, where we are going to present you with one thinking framework, how to think about problems in research. And then and the last part is we'll introduce you to idea planning template. That's one of the resource available at on the ET website, at Tech IT Bombay website, that you can use. So we are going to talk about this idea planning template and make you do some hands-on activities. How are we going to run this workshop is is really important to understand that we are going to start from one basic topic and one basic point, and then we are going to spirally build on top of that in several dimensions, such that you can slowly graduate through the different levels of concepts that we want to convey to you. Other thing is workshop would be active learning. That means there will be a lot of activities. And in order to make sure that we make full use of this workshop, we need to, because this is an online workshop, so we need to take care that we listen to the content that speakers are speaking properly, carefully, and we do the activities sincerely. So these activities are really important. And yeah, so now we can move ahead and switch to Pankaj for the first session, critically reflective teaching. Pankaj, can you now share your
Yes,
screen?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, just to introduce, Pankaj is my colleague and a PhD student at IIT Bombay, and he has been working on tracking students' affective and cognitive states and researching on how to use these tracked data to further inform teachers such that they can improve their teaching by critically reflecting based on the data provided. So he'll start with his session. Thank you, Pankaj.
Yeah. Thank you, Shitanshu. Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining in. So I'll be turning off my video because my network is a bit flaky. So I'll keep it on for a few minutes and after that, I'll turn it off. Is that okay, Shitanshu?
Yeah,
Right, right.
Shitanshu, you
Please go
could
ahead.
also turn off your video. Yeah, just to conserve bandwidth. Yeah.
Yeah, so specifically, I'll be talking about the aspect of critically reflective teaching. And as Shitanshu mentioned about the spiral curriculum and how we'll be talking about some basic things and then we'll be spiraling around that and we'll be expanding on it. So what we are doing is we are starting with this aspect of critically reflective teaching. What does it mean? Why it is important? And why as a teacher we should have a reflective practice of teaching. So this I'll be talking about. So if you look back in March, the lockdown hit and like we started with using a lot of tools. Like most of the teachers started with using video conferencing platforms and different ICT tools in the teaching learning process, and most of the teaching learning process happened in the online scenario. And it's not like we all started with using all the tools during this period only. So before that also we used to have some integration of ICT tools in our teaching learning process, but this was the time where that was like at peak and most of the like all of the teachers had to use it, right? So like I was talking about different ICT tools, and different ICT tools have different purposes. Like for example, it have purpose of delivering the content. So how you deliver the content, how you communicate with the students, and the aspect of assessing the students and managing class, and all those kind of aspects are covered when we try to use ICT tools in our teaching learning process. So when we use that, we might have taken into account different aspects related to the tools that we are using and the decisions that we are taking. We definitely might have had certain basis for that. Okay, so what we'll do is now we'll start with an activity. So telling that, yeah, we use a lot of tools and we practiced in our teaching learning process. So let's do an activity and see what we have done till now. So you might have been using a variety of ICT tools in your classroom or online teaching, and you might be using it for different purposes. For example, you want students to work at, let's say, understand level, like they are comprehending something, or you want them to apply whatever they have learned, or maybe something like creating entirely new stuff. And for that purpose, you might be using a variety of ICT tools in the teaching learning process. So here is one example related to that. For example, this is a simulation. So the topic is packet transfer, and you are using this simulation with certain purpose. So you have some purpose like pedagogical purpose, and you are thinking about like, okay, what is the content that I'm delivering, and you're using this kind of ICT tool, which is visualization or simulation, you can say. And then there are variety of tools that you might be using. So the question that I have here is, so you might have been using a variety of tools, but what factors did you consider while choosing a specific ICT tool to support the teaching learning process and make it more effective? And along with that, there is one more question I have. So you also think about how those factors, according to you, support student learning. Yeah. So again, to reiterate what I meant is, so we all are using different ICT tools, but we might have different basis for selecting those tools. So what factors you consider while choosing a specific ICT tool, and according to you, how those factors will support the student learning in the process. Yeah, so you have to post your responses in chat. Yeah, okay, so I can see some responses here, like ease of use. Then someone is saying that it should be engaging and good user interface. So some aspects related to technology people are talking about. Then good visualization and seamless integration of teaching content. So here the aspect of content and whatever the ICT tool you are using. So the relation between the two, the teacher is trying to establish, and whether the tool is interactive or not, and whether it provides a scope for discussions. And yeah, so student should it should let student play around with. So that is one important aspect teachers are talking about. And again, possibility of collaboration, student engagement, and the platform reliability also is being talked about. Yeah, so like there are different things in the responses that I can observe. So one thing is related to the content, like what is the content that is being taught, and along with that the technology aspect of it also being discussed, like how well you can integrate those. So are there any other responses? Maybe I'll wait for 10 or 15 more seconds and then I'll move ahead. Okay, so I think this is it. And okay, so now what I'll be talking about is, yeah, so like some of you talked explicitly about content and how to integrate that technology with the content and that kind of relationship. So basically you might have taken into account either implicitly or explicitly the three factors that are mentioned here, or maybe some of them, not all of them, while choosing a specific tool. For example, the nature of content. So what is the nature of content? And based on that, you might have selected a particular tool. Like if you want students to do something procedurally, so some procedural knowledge is required, then you may have chosen a different tool for that purpose. Then if you want students to, like for students to make something which is invisible and you want to make it visible for the student, for example, the example of simulation that I showed. So where something which is invisible, you are making it visible, that process and how it works. Along with that, there is definitely certain pedagogical purpose you go with. So you might have certain pedagogical purpose, like for example, you want students to conceptually reason about something, and that's the reason you are using simulation. You are allowing them to interact with the simulation, establish relationships of among different variables, and then based on that come up with a conceptual reasoning for a particular aspect that you want them to learn. And along with that, there is a third aspect which is a bit broad in nature, which is not as specific as pedagogical purpose or content, but it is about the context of the learner. Like what is the background of the learner, what is their prior knowledge, and what they bring to the teaching learning context. So this is a bit broader in nature, and where you take into account what their background is, for example, the language proficiency and all those kind of stuff. So this is also something which is an important factor that we need to take into account. Yeah, and now what I want you to do is, so we have used a lot of ICT tools, and I also talked about the different factors like content, pedagogy, and the importance of context and learner while you choose an ICT tool. Then now I want you to step back and look back and think more deeply about some of the questions. So the questions that I am posing here is, so we used a lot of ICT tools, but have you thought about how did the students perceive the use of that ICT tool? So whatever the ICT tool you are choosing, whether the tool worked for them or not. So you have certain intention, like, yeah, this tool, if I'm using, students will do this, and they'll get something out of it. So whether that tool really worked for the students or not, and what actually the tool had an impact on the students learning. So what is the impact of the use of the tool on students learning? So these are some questions that we need to think about, and I think we have good reasons for choosing a particular ICT tool, or per se any educational technology tool that you want to use in your teaching learning process. But we also need to think about this critical questions when we move ahead and when we implement something in the classroom teaching. So with this, what I'm doing is, so I'm switching to a different aspect of how do we approach our teaching. So till now I talked about how we choose ICT tools, and there are certain criteria to do that, and we also need to think about what is the effect of that and how it works and not. And then now I'll be talking about how we as a teacher approach our teaching. So basically, we all teach with the hope that our efforts invested in the teaching learning process will help students to learn what we intend them to learn. And with that hope, we always try to build a learning environment for the students where they can learn and grow. However, the sincerity of our efforts doesn't always turn out to be something which is productive for them, productive for the students' learning. And there are a variety of reasons for this, because the learning process is inherently complex in nature, and it takes a lot of efforts and time to understand the underlying complexity and to deal with each and every component of the learning process. And so one of the reasons I'll be specifically talking about. So one of the reasons is what is called as teaching innocently. So what does teaching innocently means? So teaching innocently means thinking that we are always understanding exactly what it is that we are doing and what effect we are having. So for example, we choose a particular tool. We say that this ICT tool is better, or if this is the way, if I'm using, if I'm teaching a particular concept, so this is how it will lead to student learning. And this will have good impact or good effect on students learning. So this is what we think about. Teaching innocently also means that assuming that the meanings and significance we place in our actions are the ones that students take from them. So for example, we think that collaborative learning is better, and we plan out some activities and we use some technology tools to facilitate the collaborative activities in the process. But we have certain assumptions, like we think that it is significant, it is important, and based on that we have a certain set of actions that we execute in the process. And we also think that students are also taking the same sense, or they are also taking the same meaning out of it. So this is something that we think about, and these two aspects, if we are thinking in this manner, we call it as teaching innocently. And so basically what happens at best, so if we think that this is something we usually think about, so these are naive assumptions about our teaching. So at best, teaching this way can be called as naive teaching. And at worst, basically, if we think about all these aspects, like, okay, so whatever I'm doing is having good impact, and I'm not critically looking at it, and I'm thinking that students are also taking the similar meanings or the significance that I place in my actions. So that the other end of this continuum could be like, it might induce pessimism, guilt, and lethargy in your teaching practice. So what do I mean by this? So sometimes you put in a lot of efforts to do something. You have certain teaching strategies, you use a variety of tools and innovative ideas you bring into the teaching learning process, but you seem to be like it's not working. So students are not engaged, they are not participating in the activities, and that way it may induce the pessimism, like, yeah, okay, so this is not going to work, and that kind of negativity will come in, and it may lead to the guilt and lethargy, like, for example, like it's not going to work and I'm not going to do it any further. So this is something which is an outcome of this assumptions, or this teaching innocently, what I called is that. So if we think about these aspects, so it may either lead to naive teaching, or the aspect like the problems of pessimism, guilt, and lethargy. So basically what happens is, so we rarely have full awareness of what we are doing. So even if we think that we know what we are doing and what impact it will have on students learning, but we rarely have full awareness of what we are doing. And since we frequently misread how others perceive our actions, so others here I mean by students, so if we perceive that way, then we are basically taking an uncritical stance, and this uncritical stance towards our practice basically sets up us for a lifetime of frustration. So what I mean is the second block I talked about, where the aspects of pessimism, guilt, and lethargy. So basically, because of that lack of awareness, and we not taking the critical stance towards the teaching practice, so this leads to things not working the way we intended them to work, and which basically turn out to be something which you either stop doing, or you don't know what we need to do in future. So as I talked about this teaching innocently aspects and what different problems it may bring. So to address the challenges and problems that I just talked about, so there is something called as practice of critically reflecting on our own teaching practice. And this is a key to address the challenges and problems that I just mentioned. So what we mean by critically reflective teaching? So first, let's try to understand what reflective teaching is. So in simple terms, reflective teaching means we look back, so looking at what we do in the classroom, so looking at what you do in the classroom, thinking about why you do it, and thinking about if it works. And this entire process of self-observation and self-evaluation, where you think about what actions you have taken, and why you have taken those actions, and what impact it had, so whether it really worked for the students or not. So that process of self-observation and self-evaluation is something called as a teacher reflection. And this process is basically rooted in the understanding that teachers recognize teaching as a process which lies open to scrutiny and deliberation. So basically, we look at like if that can be changed. So if we look back and identify something not working, so that can be changed so that the process can be made more effective and more fruitful for the students. So this comes from that philosophical standpoint. So saying this, now how does reflection helps us in the process of teaching? So I talked about what reflection is, but how does it help actually? So in the process, how it helps the teachers. So reflection basically provides opportunities for teachers to become aware that a problem exists. There is some problem in the teaching learning process, and basically this awareness either about the problem or the opportunity in the sense that there's no problem, but you want to advance something in your teaching practice. So this kind of awareness basically initiates the questioning and thinking about our own teaching practices. And through reflection, teachers question and think differently about their teaching to understand what is the source of the problem, or if it's if we think from opportunity point of view, then where is opportunity and how it can be made better for the students. And such approach to teaching is considered to result in more informed teacher actions, which in a way benefits both teachers as well as students. Now saying this, basically what it does is it enhances the quality of the judgments and decisions about teaching practice. So it's because once we are aware about the exact nature of the problem, and which is driving the questioning and thinking process about the problem and leading to more informed teacher actions. So all these three things together will enhance the quality of judgments and decisions that we take about our teaching process. And it's not only like we are aware about the problem and some questioning and thinking process is getting generated. There are three essential aspects that are involved in the process of effective teacher reflection, which leads to the improvement in the teaching practice. So one aspect is assumptions. Like we should know what are our assumptions about the teaching practice. The other aspect is identifying the problematic situation or the opportunity in the teaching learning process so as to address it further. And another important aspect is of generating or collecting the evidence to effectively drive this process of teacher reflection so that we can improve the teaching learning process further. So here what I'm doing is I'm giving some examples of what do I mean by problematic situation. For example, we face these issues of low engagement, or we think that even though students are learning, the students lack the disciplinary skills that they require in future. So this is something which is, let's say, a problematic situation, or the problem that you have identified. Then there are some examples of evidences. So what do I mean by evidences? So if you have implemented something, if you have used some technology or some kind of strategy in the classroom to address the problems that I just talked about. So what worked in that, what did not work, how it worked, why it is working, why it is not working. So this kind of evidences if you get, and insights related to this evidences if you get, then the process of teacher reflection will be more effective and more fruitful for the teaching learning process, because then you'll be able to pinpoint, like, yeah, this is not working, this is what I assumed, this was my assumption, but then based on the evidence, like whatever I can observe, I can see that this is not the way it is working. So all these three things together will effectively drive the process of teacher reflection, and that will definitely lead to a better teaching practice and hence improved teaching learning process. So now what I'm doing is I'm going deeper into the aspect of assumption. Even though I have mentioned here the three aspects, so in the upcoming sessions, the aspect of problem, like how to identify problems and that kind of things, and how to go ahead and look for the evidences. So these two aspects will be dealt in detail in the upcoming sessions. So I'll be focusing in this session mostly on the aspect of assumptions. So now what I'll do is I'll talk about different categories of assumptions that we hold as a teacher about the teaching learning process. And I'll also talk about some examples related to that. So the first category, so what exactly it means is, so these are basically the structuring assumptions which indicate our ways of ordering the world and what we believe to be a reality. So for example, the assumption that adults are self-directed learners. So what does it mean? If I have that assumption, I mean that the adult learners take responsibility for what they want to learn, when they want to learn, and what process they want to follow to learn that. And basically they formulate a plan, and they formulate the plan and identify the tools and resources that they may require for their own learning. So if I have this paradigmatic assumption of adults are self-directed learners, then the aspects that I just talked about, like students taking control of their own learning process, and in the process they are planning something, they are monitoring something, they are like selecting some specific tools and the ways of learning a particular aspect. So if this assumption I have, then basically it is what I believe to be a reality, like students are self-directed learners and I should let them do whatever they want on their own. So this is what is called as paradigmatic assumption. The second category of assumption is prescriptive assumptions. So prescriptive assumptions are basically about what we think shall be happening in a particular situation as a result of the paradigmatic assumptions. So for example, if you believe that adults are self-directed learners, then you assume that the best teaching is that which encourages students to take control over designing, conducting, and evaluating their own learning process. So basically, paradigmatic and prescriptive assumptions are kind of linked to each other, and prescriptive assumptions basically emerges from the paradigmatic assumptions. The third category of assumptions is called as causal assumptions. So basically, causal assumptions are assumptions about how different parts of the world work, and the conditions under which this can be changed. So like they are usually predictive in nature, like cause and effect kind of relationship. So for example, if my assumption is that adults are self-directed learners, and based on that I let them, the students, to design, evaluate their own teaching learning, their own learning process, then the causal assumption would be like, okay, so to do it more effectively, if you use learning contracts, then this will increase students self-directed less. So what do I mean by learning contract? So here is one example of learning contract. So before the start of the learning process and everything, you can have this learning contract with the students, and these are the different aspects to that. For example, the student says that I'll attend at least 80% of the class session, so it commit to certain things, like course participation related thing, or he'll complete all the assigned reading. So this is something, a kind of contract that is happening between the teacher and student, and the teacher assumes that if we use this kind of learning contracts, then this will increase students' self-directedness, because now they're committing to something, and in a way, as they have committed to something, they'll proceed further, and they'll try to address all the things that are mentioned in the contract. So by saying all this, now I talked about assumptions from a very philosophical standpoint. Now what we'll do is we'll do one activity, and this activity again is about one particular assumption. So this assumption is like, it's common sense to cut lecturing down to a minimum, since lecturing induces passivity in the students and it kills critical thinking. So this is what let's say one causal assumption is. So what you have to do is you go to menti.com, and there will be this question like, whether do you agree with the statement that is given above. So you need to select your answer, whether you agree, you do not agree, or you partly agree to it and partly you do not agree. So maybe in that case you'll select the third option. So go to menti.com and enter this code. I'll post the code in chat. Okay, so now I switch to the responses part, and I can see there is like mix of responses, and most of the people saying that yeah, they agree with this statement, like cutting lecturing down to a minimum will be better, because it induces passivity in the students and it may also kill critical thinking. Yes. So I may wait for maybe 10 more seconds. We have got 14 responses, and maybe 10 more seconds. I'll wait for a few more responses, and then I'll move to the next part of the activity. So the point that I would like to highlight here is, so even though I mentioned this assumption, so different people have different standpoint for this particular kind of assumption. Like some people think that this is definitely going to be useful if we cut down the lecturing part, and some other things that no, it is not something I agree with. Or some people have mixed responses saying that yeah, so at some point of time maybe cutting down lecturing is good, but at other point of time that may not be the case, right? So with this, what I'll do now, I'll switch to the next part of the activity. And the next part is, so now you voted for whether you agree with this statement or not. So now what you have to do is, based on your selection, you have to write at least 2 points to justify why do you think so. So if you have arguments for that, and why you think that your answer is yes. So basically you have to justify your answer, and how you'll do that. So basically you go to this link and post your responses in this Padlet link. So I'll show you quickly how you will do that. Yeah. So once you open this, you'll see this kind of interface, and at the bottom you'll see this plus icon. You can click here and start writing, and you can enter your responses here. So in the same sticky note, you write the points that whatever you have. So maybe we'll do it for 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll move to the discussion part of it.
Pankaj, can you show the activity question once again?
Sure. Yeah, just a minute. No, you can just write there, and if you click somewhere on the interface, it will get saved. There's no need of uploading something whenever you write. Okay, I think I was on mute and I was talking. Sorry for that. So I was saying that we had certain responses, like some people agreeing that we need to cut it down and some people talking about why it is important. So now what I'll do is I'll put up certain points, and which will let you think about your assumptions of why do you think cutting down the lecturing aspect is important. Okay, so basically, before students can engage critically with the ideas and actions they may need. So if you have given some task to them and you want them to critically think on that task or the problem that you want them to solve, so before students can engage critically with those ideas that they have and the actions they may need to take based on that, a period of assimilation and of the essential subject content and the skills that are required to address that problem, and then grounding in a subject area. So this is something which is important, and it will be required to effectively execute the process of critical thinking. So this aspect is important, and lecturing may be a effective way of ensuring this. So why I'm saying this, it's because if we are not going to model the process of critical thinking to students and we just ask them to interact with each other and work in group and critically think about a problem that is being posed to them, that is not sufficient. So before students, before we expect students to think critically, we also give them opportunity to see this process modeled in front of their eyes, right? And lecturing is a good way of doing that. Now we'll see how lectures can effectively do that. So in a lecture, basically what happens is the teacher can do this modeling process, can execute this modeling process. For example, in a lecture, if the teacher models questioning of her own assumptions, like if there is a problem which is open-ended in nature, what all different assumptions the teacher have, and while solving that problem, how the different assumptions are getting questioned. If this aspect of the process of critical thinking is explicitly mentioned or explicitly demonstrated. Along with that, if teachers also models the identification of the different inconvenient theories, facts, and philosophies that she has deliberately overlooked in the process of thinking about solving a particular problem. So if teacher also models these aspects very explicitly in the process. Along with that, if teacher also shows the openness to considering alternate viewpoints, if students are working in group, and if you also show that you need to be open enough to consider the alternate viewpoints to the problem that you are solving and the solution that you want to come up with. So this entire process, if teacher models through lecturing, then basically what student will have is student will have a model with him, and then student can effectively execute the process that you expect them to execute. And basically what happens is, through such critically stimulating lectures, a teacher can set a critical tone for the learning, demonstrating that this is how you should do it and this is how it should be done. By first modeling the process, the teacher basically now earns the right to ask students to think critically. So if we just say that here is an activity, here is a problem, think critically about this, it will not serve the purpose. So this modeling aspect is very important, and lecturing could be a good way to model the process of critical thinking. So basically the point that I wanted to make here is lecturing is not always something which is bad in nature or which will lead to passivity in students. So this is something which is what we call it as assumption. So this is what assumption we have, but now we need to critically think about that assumption. And once we critically think about it, go deeper and try to understand more aspects related to it, then we may get different viewpoints or different standpoints related to whatever the decisions that we are taking. So this is the aspect that I basically wanted to highlight here. So now what I want you to do is, this is the last part of the session. So now I talked about different assumptions, categories of them, and how we need to critically think about them. So here is a self-reflection activity for you. So you can do it after the session also. So the first part is, think what are your educational and professional assumptions. So in the teaching learning process, in the teaching practice, you might be having certain assumptions. You might be thinking that this is the way it works, and you have certain assumptions about the reality. Now, what you have to do is think about all those kind of educational and professional assumptions you have, pinpoint its type, like paradigmatic, prescriptive, and causal. So it will help you to basically categorize them and understand it better. And once you have some assumption which is causal, then if you're able to link it with the prescriptive and paradigmatic, then that entire link will be established, and you will be able to think more thoroughly about the assumptions that you have. Once you do that, identify how the assumption becomes visible in the classroom practice and your behaviors. So you might have certain assumption. For example, I talked about the paradigmatic assumption of adults are self-directed learners. So it reflects in the classroom practice that you have. So you let students to take most of the decisions about their learning process. So you also need to identify how your assumptions, the assumptions that you have, becomes visible in the practice. And maybe the guiding question for that is what impact that assumption might have on the students. So once you identify that, what do you think, what impact that kind of assumptions might have on the students? And the third aspect is identify the potential alternative practices for that. So like, for example, we talked about lecturing and group activities and cutting down lecturing, and we have some alternative practices for that. So you also, based on your assumption, try to identify potential alternative practices and why do you think those alternative practices would work. So basically what I'm trying to do is I'm asking you to critically think about all these aspects, all the different assumptions that you have, and how these assumptions actually manifest in the process. So this is one self-reflection activity that you can do after the session. So now a takeaway for this session from my point of view is that the awareness about our own assumptions and taking a critical stance on it, it will help us in effectively identifying the problems in the teaching learning process or the problematic situation, as well as the opportunities that are there in the teaching learning process. So awareness about our own assumptions and taking a critical stance on it, it is very important. And the second aspect which is related to it is important to explicitly think about the evidence which will demonstrate that we were able to address the problem or leverage the opportunity that we have identified. So I think this is something which will be discussed in detail in the rest of the sessions. Yeah. So I think with this, I end this session. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. So let's, for the next 15 minutes before going to lunch, I'll invite Prajesh to talk about his part. And Prajesh is also a PhD student at Tech IIT Bombay, and
So, quick
he's about
question,
to graduate.
Shitanshu.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, will Can this be absorbed into the second part, Prajesh's part, because we are at the 12:30 mark, and we
Yeah.
don't want to stand between people and the lunch break. So since you are going to continue the workshop after lunch also, do you think we can absorb it later?
Yeah, I think if we want, if we prefer to right away start the lunch, then we can take the break.
Yeah, that might be better because people have had
Yeah,
a long morning,
yeah,
and
yeah. So,
Pankaj session has been quite reasonably heavy.
so,
So,
yeah. So
what do
instead
you say,
of,
Prajesh? Are you okay with it?
Yes, yes, we are fine. Yeah.
Yeah, so then let us end the session here on time, and Shitanshu, you can pick up in the afternoon with Prajesh, whatever Prajesh was to do right now.
correct. Okay, so instead of stretching the session by 15 minutes now, we can take 15 more minutes at the end of the day,
Yeah,
and yeah, make things fit together. Thank
yeah,
you, everyone, and we'll be back again around 2:30 p.m. and then we can continue the session till for 2 hours more. Okay, thank you.
yeah. So it's
See you.
back to the organizers.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Sridhar Iyer, speakers Dr. Shitanshu, Mr. Pankaj, and we will now have a lunch break, and we will join again at 2:30 p.m. as per the schedule. At 2:30 p.m. we will have a session, which will with a session chair, Professor Viraj Kumar, and the topic of the session will be workshop on designing conductive research studies, part 2. Thank you, everybody. We will join again at 2:30.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hello. Yes. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I can. I can. Hello. I can hear you. Hello.
I know Shitanshu has a great session planned for us. So,
Stop share.
sorry, yeah. So Shitanshu, over to you, and looking forward to the session. I think the recording is paused. Oh no, it is continuous. So we're recording. Great, thank you. Shitanshu, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Viraj. And now, before inviting Prajesh, I would just like to uh, announce that if anyone has questions to Pankaj about last part of the last session, yeah, you can post it on the chat, or you can just unmute your mic and ask it. So we can wait for 2 minutes for questions, and then we can switch to Prajesh's talk.
So maybe while we're waiting, I have one quick question.
Right.
So, just if you could share as an example of an instance where by making a sort of incorrect assumption or not probing your assumptions carefully enough, you may have ended up going in a slightly wrong direction. So as a researcher, wouldn't mind sharing an example, you or anyone else in the team.
Right. Pankaj, would you like to respond?
Yeah, Shitanshu, it was not clear. Did you hear that? Because it was
Sorry,
not
Yeah.
clear for me.
Okay, Viraj
sorry.
can
Should I repeat? Is it audible now?
Yeah,
Yes.
it is audible now.
Okay, Pankaj, I was asking, since you had spent quite a bit of time talking about assumptions and making sure you query your assumptions. So could you give an example, either a personal one or any other one that you're aware of, where by not querying your assumptions carefully enough, as a researcher, you could get led astray. Share one example of that. That would be nice.
Yeah, sure. Um, I think there is. Hello, Shitanshu. I think someone's mic is on. Can you please figure out whose it is? I'm not able to figure it out.
Yeah, it's done. Muted. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, right, sir. So actually, in research, specifically, if you ask me, then yeah, like many times it happens like you have certain assumptions. For example, let's say specifically in my research context, now I have assumptions that like I'm developing a feedback system for the teacher so that they can reflect back on what students think about their teaching practice, and that's a real-time feedback system. Now the assumption that I have is, okay, so the teacher will use the feedback in a particular way. So this is the assumption that I have, but I need to critically think about that, and I also need to take alternate viewpoints. So that is nothing but teachers' viewpoint and how they may take into account student perceptions about their teaching. So this is something I need to look at. And yeah, so this is from research point of view, but I think most of the assumptions, at least in my experience, from teaching point of view, I had like many assumptions, like yeah, group work is definitely good and collaborative work needs to be there, but then there are a lot of things that goes behind, and there are a lot of underlying mechanisms which undergoes, and we are not able to think deeper about that. So initially when I started as a teacher, group work in my classrooms, I was like, okay, so I'll give some activity and then just I'll execute that, but then participation and all those kind of thing was not there. But then I inquired in detail, like I talked to students, how do they perceive this group activities, and what kind of changes do they think will be helpful and useful for them, so that I can orchestrate the activities in a good manner. So this is how, specifically related to teaching, this is one example where some of my assumptions related to group activities or collaborative activities were further like verified, either validated or invalidated at different points of time.
Thanks for sharing that, Manish. Thank you.
Right. So I think that it is time, so we can switch to Prajesh's talk. So he'll be talking briefly about computing education research. And okay, Prajesh, let's start.
Okay, thanks Shitanshu, thanks Professor Viraj. Just wanted to check if I'm audible and you can
Yeah.
see my screen.
Yeah, all clear.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining this session. And um, so this is in this session, I'll be motivating the need for doing computing education research. And this will be like a bridge between Pankaj's session and what Shitanshu and Lakshmi, my colleagues, they will present in the next session after this. So Pankaj presented gave details about, you know, how as instructors we need to be critical about our teaching and teaching processes, and you know how important it is for us to reflect on our teaching practices. So that I believe is the first step which will help you move towards this path of doing research in computing education. But if you want to move further, this session as well as the next session, I hope, will motivate you to move towards doing computing education research. So this was already covered by Professor Sridhar in the keynote, but I thought I'll just reiterate. So most of us are instructors and we have expertise in teaching computing education subjects, right? We over the years we have taught many courses, we have designed curricula, we have used a lot of technologies in our classrooms, we have done assessments, and while now that Pankaj has told, we need to be we need to critically reflect on our teaching practices. That will help us help us move towards computing education research. But we also need, you know, a knowledge about various subjects like learning sciences, cognition, basically to understand how people are learning, you know, the theories behind how people learn, as well as research methods which would help us to evaluate our teaching and learning strategies. So, and both of this combined will constitutes what is computing education research. So what is computing education research? So this is an example, this is taken from a blog by Professor Mark Gusdale, and it talks about computing education being how people come to understand computing and how we as researchers and instructors can facilitate this understanding. So firstly, it is not about teaching computer science because all of us do that in our classrooms, but it is about designing pedagogies and technologies for improving teaching and learning of certain CS concepts, right? And as well as conducting rigorous studies in order to measure its effectiveness. And secondly, it's primarily not about using new technologies, although there are many people who use technologies and use innovative and new technologies. But in the research community, and we have also seen that, an effective pedagogy trumps technology all the time. So as if you have a very good technology, but the pedagogy is weak, it is likely that students will not learn as effectively as they could. And finally, it's not primarily about programming, although there's a lot of interest in understanding how students learn programming. But there are various aspects in computing education research. There are diverse subjects like algorithms, software engineering, AI, teaching, learning of security, and so many things, as well as different socio-cultural issues like ethics. When we are doing artificial intelligence, what are ethical concerns which students need to be taught about, issues about privacy in the internet age, about broadening participation across different sections of society, and so on. So all this, there are a wide range of such questions which we can investigate in computing education research. So what we will be doing now is we'll do a quick activity in order to understand, okay, what do computing education researchers do research on? So if you want to learn new field, most of us, I think the first step which we do is read papers, right? So what we will do now is I'll share a document with you all. That document has 3 abstracts which have been taken from a recent conference. ICER is a computing education conference. What you can do is choose any one of those abstracts. Then as you read the abstract, think about what are certain themes and keywords. Okay, as you read the abstract, keep on thinking about what are the topics which are being taught, what is the target audience, what is the focus of the paper, or anything which you find is important and interesting. And now whatever comes to your mind, you can post it into this Padlet. I'm sure all of you have used the Padlet before in Pankaj's talk. And after you do that, if we have time, you can check the other abstracts also and post your thoughts on the Padlet. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just share this. Yeah, okay, someone can share it.
So I have already posted the link on chat.
Okay, thank you, Chitansh. Yeah. So we'll take around 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes is sufficient for you all to read one of the abstracts and populate the Padlet with certain themes and keywords. Okay, we'll just take 2 more minutes. If you all have finished one abstract, you can just glance through the others also and post your views on the Padlet. All right. Yeah. So thank you all for doing the activity. So I see a lot of keywords on academia industry gap, and I'm sure as instructors, most of you might be, aware of such a gap, and I think we are having sessions regarding that as well. And then there is something about creating and evaluating tools, right? Then there is something about kindergarten programming. So we see that programming in that abstract was from a research group in Japan, and there they have started programming for kindergarten students also, and they have evaluated the effectiveness of that. And then we see an abstract on software design diagrams, and right. So yeah, so the goal of this activity was to just get you started with, reading research papers. So this conference ICER is a good place to start, because it talks about the recent papers in computing education research. Okay, so I would encourage all of you to go look at ICER and other conferences and just read the titles and the abstracts to get a fair idea about the research happening uh, in this area. Okay, so so these are some examples. So it's not an exhaustive list, but it talks about, how people learn computing and how can it be taught more effectively by teachers and by people. And there are other societal questions also, socio-technical questions which can be asked, like, how can it be delivered equitably for all groups of people? How can access be improved and all of that, right? So uh, in uh, in this slide, I'm just going to motivate all of you to to consider computing education research as an important discipline. And many of you might be unsure of, how do I start and whether I should start. And uh, many departments across US, Europe, and Australia, they have considered computing education research as a valid research discipline. And especially in India, there is a great need of computing education researchers, because uh, there are diverse learners who come with varied experiences. And especially in the job market, knowledge of computing is very important for a large number and variety of jobs. And I believe as college instructors, we are in a unique position because we have expertise in teaching CS topics, right? And we have been teaching for so many years and a wide variety of topics. And we also have some intuitive knowledge about what works, what doesn't work. You have some idea about what's going on in students' minds and all. And I believe with some more efforts and with this workshop and other resources, it will help you get started in doing computing education research. And I'm sure all of you can make meaningful contributions in India as well as the global computing education research efforts. So this session was just to motivate you into, getting and giving you an idea of computing education research. And in the next session, you will be looking at how you can identify relevant research problems. And we'll be giving you some templates and some questions to get you started there. Yeah, so that's all from my side. Yeah, Shitanshu, over to you.
Yes. So before switching to me, if someone has any question to Prajesh or anyone else, you're most welcome to ask. We can do this for 3 to 5 minutes max.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question which has come up. How do we select research methods in educational research? Yeah, that's a very important and pertinent question. So I think in the next session we will be discussing something about it, but not entirely. Yeah, so I think maybe definitely we'll be able to answer it in the next session. Yeah. Okay, the next question is, how do we differentiate with humanities researchers? Yeah, so I would say that computing education research involves a lot of methodologies and research methods from the social sciences, learning sciences, and so on. But we also deal with technology, right? Like designing interventions, developing technologies. So I don't know if, yeah, so one way to think about it is we are a socio-technical research area where we borrow things from domains like CS, the technology areas, as well as the humanities and other areas. Uh, so I think that is the main distinction. Yeah, that's, if anyone else wants to add something, Shitanshu, the others.
Rajesh, can I try to add
Sure. Yeah,
your answer? Yeah, thank you for the question, Neeraj Goel. So, like Rajesh said, we kind of take the methods as well as certain theories also from humanities, because if you look at computing education research, who is in the middle of it? The learner is in the middle of it. So it's a human. So you would want to take theories, about us from the humanities and the methods that are used to study us from the humanities. But what we deal with is a discipline-based education research. In the sense, we are involved in advancing the theory of how people learn computing. So it could be how people learn software design, how people learn, let's say, data structures, how better could we help them learn data structures. There is a nuance to it. So we take from them, but we are different from them is what I would say. And then just adding to Elizabeth's question, how do we select the research methods? It actually depends on the question that you're trying to answer. And what is the kind of answer that you're looking at? Let's say, for example, you want to look how graduating students create software design. Now, you could look at it from take like a small qualitative research study, take 5 people and do a video recording and do a call analysis. Or you could also look at, huge and large and quantitative studies, statistical studies. You can look at, give a certain problem and look at, let's say, many different institutes and see how students are answering. So there are different methods, but it really depends on what is the question, the research question that you're looking at, and what is the answer that you're looking for.